all of a sudden, we've become the top oil producer on the planet as a result of fracking. We got some excess stuff, and we'd like to sell some of it, but we're kind of we're hamstrung by legislation from the 1970s, an oil crisis from many decades, a generation ago. Joining us on 710 KURV, the director of the Port of Brownsville, Ed Campirano, and this is either going to be a regular conversation or one of the shortest we've ever done with Ed. Ed, do we stand to benefit at the Port of Brownsville if lawmakers decide to, start selling U.S. crude on the international stage?
Yes, there is an opportunity for the Port of Brownsville to participate in the export of crude to other markets.
Because we're so close to where we're fracking some of this energy, yes?
Well, yes and no. Essentially, I guess conventional wisdom is that the oil is going to go to the Gulf Coast ports. And so those ports are going to be the primary handlers of crude oil for export to foreign market. Well, the Port of Brownsville is no different. It does make sense from an export standpoint that you can essentially deliver oil to the port, store it, then load on vessels and have it exported to foreign countries. It doesn't make as much sense to be, reverse that to where we see there's also the discussion about the oil swap with Mexico, for example, where, swapping heavy crude for light crude. What makes more sense is really the export market.
How do we get it here? Would we need a new system of pipes?
Not necessarily. I think what you would see primarily, the easiest way and probably the quickest way to market would be to see it by rail. Tank cars with crude coming to Gulf Coast ports, coming to the Port of Brownsville, unloaded here, and then put into storage tanks for the purposes of loading vessels for other markets. That's probably the most feasible and practical way of doing it.
Well, it sounds to me like we need more rail lines around here, and we would definitely need new storage facilities at the port.
Yeah. Well, from a rail perspective, the port is well served. I mean, you already have both Union Pacific and BNSF, which do have access to the valley essentially through Brownsville. And so you do have rail access to the region. And of course, the port has its own rail service, which is the Brownsville Rio Grande International Railroad, which essentially would be handling all of the car movement in and out of the port, but it'll interchange for the Class 1 railroads with Union Pacific and BNSF. So from an infrastructure standpoint, from a rail perspective, the system's in place.
Ed Campirano is the port director, Port of Brownsville, joining us on 710 KQRV. We're talking about the prospect of maybe creating more jobs here in the area as a result of exporting U.S. crude oil if lawmakers in Washington agree to change policy and allow the U.S. to export U.S. crude.
Ed, Tim Sullivan here. A little background, if we could. This idea of lifting our crude oil exports, why is this becoming a good idea in the minds of some just now?
Well, I think the biggest issue is, again, you have a large availability of crude oil, much more than we can handle in this country. And there's other markets in other countries that do need it. And so consequently, it's an opportunity to export a commodity that's produced in the United States for foreign export.
Is that it? Is this large availability now of crude oil, is that what has been preventing this idea from gaining steam?
Well, the biggest issue, again, is how do you get it to market? And we happen to have a law that says that you cannot do that. Now that you have a large supply available of crude that could be exported to foreign market, there is a push to lift that ban. And so, there is a demand for it in other countries that can't produce it or don't have it. And so consequently, that market is one that is readily available. I was going to say that, the president announced early in his term, this second term, that he wanted to see a greater balance between the fact that we import more commodities than we export. So he wanted to see the closing of the gap in encouraging more exports of U.S. products. Well, this is one way to help close that gap between being an import country where we import a lot of commodities from foreign countries and yet we lag behind on exports. Well, the energy market is kind of driving, part of that initiative to help raise the export levels. Crude oil is just one of those commodities.
And there does appear to be some bipartisan support. Republicans, of course, like this, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe our Valley Congressman Henry Cuellar has gotten behind the effort, too.
And I do believe that Congressman Vela is bullish on that as well.
All right.
Yeah.
You also have Jim Green of the Houston. I mean, Texas is an energy state. You have other energy states around the country. You have the sweet crude from the Bakken and the Dakotas. You have other oil producing regions of the country, and so consequently, those areas would stand to benefit from opening up the export market.
Yeah, Ed Campirano, Port Director for Brownsville, joining us on 710 KURV with the potential somewhere on the horizon for the U.S. crude exports and that new business perhaps coming to the Valley. Do you think that Houston and Corpus have an unfair advantage over Brownsville where you really need to hustle and try to sell this area for U.S. crude exports?
Well, they have obviously, for a long time, have had built-in infrastructure that allows for that. But, I think the conventional wisdom also is that, there's going to be a lot of supply. There's going to be the whole notion of, logistics as well. And so, logistically, we have the tools necessary to be able to handle the export.
Tools and space, because I know one thing, Port of Houston, it's crowded. It's really crowded. Right? Yeah.
Well, and in addition to crowding, you also have on the waterway. You have congestion in and out of the port.
Oh, yeah.
The same thing is occurring in a lot of these other areas. So, it's not to say that it won't happen in Houston. It won't happen in Corpus. But certainly you can also say that there stands an opportunity for it to happen in Brownsville as well.
And you guys are doing a good job at selling it as well. Well, you got the potential of crude exports, and then you've got liquefied natural gas exporting. We're hoping that becomes a reality for job creation down here, but that's a lot more business. You've got Pacific trade and a lot more manufacturing that's taking place near us at the Maquilas and Monterrey, Saltillo, and northern Mexico. Sounds to me like on the infrastructure, Ed, on rail and even deepening of the port, you've got a lot of work to do at the Port of Brownsville.
There is, and the region from an infrastructure standpoint is also responding because, you do have to have that regional collaboration for, economic development as well as you do for some of the other initiatives you've seen in the Valley. And, the interstate designation is a huge plus. The continued improvement through the county, the regional mobility authorities and their plans for infrastructure expansion. Like I said, we do have rail, the recent completion and opening and operation of the West Rail Bridge. You have pipeline connectivity. You're going to see more pipeline connectivity. We obviously have a deep water seaport. We have the connection to the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. So, the region has the tools in place to logistically compete for a much more diverse opportunity than we've had in the past.
Mr. C, thank you much. Ed Campirano, Port Director, Port of Brownsville, the Valley Port, joining us on 710 KURV.